Good morning, everyone. Thought for the week this week with me. I'm Fran. I'm Children and Families Worker for Portishead Church of England. And this week we're thinking about Acts chapter 8. I'm going to read verses 4 to 8 and then 26 to 40. Now those who were scattered went from place to place proclaiming the word. Philip went down to the city of Samaria and proclaimed the Messiah to them. The crowd with one accord listened eagerly to what was said by Philip, hearing and seeing the signs that he did. For unclean spirits, crying with loud shrieks, came out of many who were possessed, and many others who were paralysed or lame were cured, and there was great joy in that city. Then an angel of the Lord said to Philip, "Get up and go towards the south, to the road that leads down from Jerusalem to Gaza. This is a wilderness road." So he got up and went. Now there was a Ethiopian eunuch, a court official of Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, in charge of her entire treasury. He had come to Jerusalem to worship and was returning home, seated in his chariot. He was reading the prophet Isaiah. Then the Spirit said to Philip, "Go over to this chariot and join it." So Philip ran up to it and heard him reading the prophet Isaiah. He asked, "Do you understand what you are reading?" He replied, "How can I, unless someone guides me?" And he invited Philip to get in and sit beside him. Now the passage of the scripture that he was reading was this: "Like a lamb he was led to the slaughter, and like a sheep silent before its shearer, so he does not open his mouth. In his humiliation, justice was denied him. For who can describe his generation? For his life is taken away from the earth." The eunuch asked Philip, "About whom, may I ask you, does the prophet say this? About himself or of someone else?" Then Philip began to speak, and starting with this scripture, he proclaimed to him the good news about Jesus. As they were going along the road, they came to some water, and the eunuch said, "Look, here is water. What is to prevent me from being baptized?" He commanded the chariot to stop, and both of them, Philip and the eunuch, went down into the water, and Philip baptized him. When they came up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord snatched Philip away. The eunuch saw him no more, and went on his way rejoicing. But Philip found himself at Azotus, and as he was passing through the region, he proclaimed the good news to all the towns until he came to Caesarea. So at the beginning of Acts chapter 8, after the stoning of Stephen, the fledgling Christian community in Jerusalem is persecuted and flees. Philip, our protagonist, first ends up in Samaria, where he preaches the gospel and heals people, before being moved on by the Spirit to a road in Gaza, where he has another remarkable encounter. Now, what do we know about Samaria? We know it's a place that Jews don't go for a start. It's a place where Jesus encountered a woman at a well and called himself living water. It's a place where people are so hated that a Samaritan was named as the good neighbour in the parable of that name. It's maybe not so surprising that Philip, who's a Greek, ended up there rather than one of the Jewish disciples. But even as a Greek, Philip broke a taboo by going there. In his actions, he declared that this was a place to be included in the good news of Jesus the Christ. And he was also fulfilling the words of Jesus at the beginning of Acts, that the disciples would be his witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. So Philip has broken one set of taboos by preaching to the Samaritans, but he's about to break a far bigger one. On the road, that dusty desert road from Jerusalem to Gaza, there is a procession of carriages and chariots, not just your everyday, ordinary ones. It's a big convoy with someone important there. But that person isn't someone you would think of as important now. The chances are he's a black man, and he's also a eunuch, someone who can never be Jewish or a proselyte, a non-Jewish convert. But He is the chief finance officer for Queen Candace of Ethiopia, and therefore someone influential. And so Philip breaks another taboo. He speaks to someone above his grade and to someone who would normally be seen as unclean. He again opens up the Jesus story to the unnamed eunuch, and things come together for him in a way that means he asks for baptism. Lo and behold, a dirty puddle is there, and he is baptized. Philip is swept away by the Spirit, and the gospel is on its way to the end of the earth. Now, this reading is often preached about in the context of mission, but I came to it this week thinking about power and control and hegemony, which effectively means how leadership and power is controlled by a class or by a social group over others. And so that got me thinking about taboos. We don't have the same taboo subjects as the early church. It doesn't matter in the same way if we're associated with groups who are ritually unclean or who are disabled or different from us. And we may too feel there aren't any taboos left really, but there are subjects we avoid discussing even with our nearest and dearest. Death is probably still a taboo subject in much of this country, and I'd suggest that other subjects may not be taboos, but there's certainly things we don't like to look at, maybe because it confronts us with our own indifference or anxiety or sense of despair. COVID has exposed some of those subjects, the poverty and inequality that has previously been brushed under the carpet, the reality of living on universal credit, the disadvantages that the global majority of peoples face. Climate change may not be a taboo subject in some ways, but actually having conversations about how we change the way we live may well be. And the Me Too movement has been in and out of the headlines for the last few years. Sarah Everard's murder brought forth a tsunami of stories from almost every woman of behaviour by men that was misogynistic and often criminal. Have we been prepared to ask the questions that would allow those stories to be told? Or has it felt like a taboo subject? Don't ask this person to a dinner party, they'll tell that story that makes us all embarrassed. Or don't ask this person, they'll tell us not to fly. Mental ill health is another taboo subject. We are much better at talking about physical ill health than mental ill health. And if you have a more serious mental health condition, that sense of taboo becomes much greater. So how do they relate to power? How did I get from power and control and hegemony via Acts 8 to taboos? Well, when taboos exist, power is being used. It suits power to say that some subjects cannot be talked about. It suits power that we don't talk about poverty and inequality or the discrimination and structural injustice that global majority people face in this country. If these subjects become common parlance, then power needs to be relinquished. The status quo starts to change. As Christians, the reality of Jesus' kingdom breaking in is that it changes the status quo, it challenges taboos, and it gives power to those who have none. The episodes in Acts 8 continue the taboo breaking that Jesus started and take it to the ends of the earth. They remind us that when we take Jesus into these conversations, people are released. Shame keeps people a prisoner, and taboos are mostly connected with shame. If we can break the taboos around poverty or discrimination or abuse or mental ill health, then people can be released into the fullness of life that Jesus offers. Some of us break taboos for individuals. Some of us are called to campaign against structural inequality. And collectively we can make a difference to those structural taboos and injustices, but it involves us handing over our power and privilege to allow those who are last to be first, and that's not a comfortable process. It's easy to talk about these things and feel like we are the rescuers. That's not our role. When we're rescuers, we're not actually breaking a taboo. We're still holding the power. truly breaking a taboo means not just making it normal to talk about mental health or racism or sexism or abuse and assault, but giving power to those people who have been living with that. And that's a scary thing to do. Philip told people about Jesus and was part of the gospel reaching the ends of the earth. He didn't then tell people how they should work that out, what it should look like, who qualified and who didn't. He simply told them that they, the people who'd been outsiders all their lives, were no longer outsiders. They were insiders. How are we going to share the message that the outsiders are the insiders? And how are we going to change the way we do things so that the outsiders are truly the insiders? Becoming a community of faith that truly models Jesus means being prepared to be changed by others who are part of that community. And that means we all need to learn to lay down our power and break our taboos. Some of you would have seen the Panorama programme earlier this week about institutional racism in the Church of England. There are some shocking stories there, but I'm afraid, as with safeguarding issues, I was not particularly surprised by the revelations. Women, people with disabilities, global majority people, and people who are vulnerable, whether because of age or situation, are traditionally victims of misused power inside and outside the church. Laying down our power and allowing those who have been the outsiders to become insiders is going to be crucial for us to learn to be God's church. This needs to happen at both institutional and parish level. We have, whether we realise it or not, immense power. It is up to us how we wield it. Amen.